Francesco, welcome to the podcast. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Dylan. It's so nice to be here.
Happy New Year. Where are you broadcasting from for the audience? Where is home base there for you?
Yeah, I'm at home. I'm in Como, which is in northern Italy, right at the footstep of the Alps. It's a great playground here. There's a big lake. George Clooney has a house on Como Lake. So yeah, it's been a very warm winter for us.
Yeah.
We got a little snow, but now it's all gone.
Yeah,
which is good for running, but it's not very good for the environment. But
it's a little startling, isn't it? I've been reading the news about the heat wave on the European continent simultaneously.
It's pretty crazy.
It's been unusually cold and wet in the American West too. So it's the climate seems to always be a ever evolving, strange, fickle, unpredictable thing in today's day and age, but that is a subject for a different conversation. Today, we're going to talk all about you. We're going to talk about your experience with trail running, your impact, your sort of multi-dimensional impact that you're having on the sport. And specifically, we'll talk a lot about the Pro Trail Runners Association, which I teased on a recent podcast with Corinne Malcolm, and that you were instrumental in founding. So you're going to give us a deep dive into what kind of stuff you guys are working on there. But first, Francesco, give a quick introduction to yourself for the audience. I've obviously followed you for a while, but there's probably a lot of people who will be listening for whom you are either a new name or they don't have a deep understanding of your story. So why don't you just give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Of course, yeah. So I'm Francesco Puppi. I'm from Italy. I'm 30 years old, and I'm a pro trail runner for Nike. I've been a runner basically since I was a very little child, since I was 6 years old. And as many other kids, I started with track and field and cross country and road running. In Europe, it's not that's like very similar to the United States, where there is like a big collegiate system. You can get involved in sports at school and stuff. So you kind of have to join private clubs and organizations. So for me, education and sports were always kind of separate. That's why, for example, for university, I really concentrated on my studies, on my academic life, and not much on running. And it was actually like my passion for trail running was born during university, which is kind of unusual because studying physics took so much energy and time, and was so hard to complete this degree that I honestly don't know how I did it. But it was like the time when I started running more consistently and started to achieve some results, travel to some international races, and just get involved at different levels in trail running. Yeah. So that's basically me. And now I'm pretty grateful for where I am at the moment. I feel I have a lot to learn, a lot to give to the sport, but it's also been great so far for many, many reasons.
Well, thank you for that quick introduction. And I want to go through a lot of that stuff. But one of the things that I've always admired about you is that you are a great professional athlete, but that you do have things outside of training and racing that you do to give back to the sport. And of course, one of those things is the Pro Trail Runners Association, which we'll get around to talking about a little bit later. But you mentioned your academic life, and I wasn't sure where I had originally heard the physicist part of your personality, but since you brought it up, I'd love to hear a little bit more about where that interest came from. Let's start with your physics career, what your focus was, and how that has potentially augmented the person that you are.
Yeah, physics probably fascinated me because it's based on very simple ideas and understanding the very basic concepts of nature, of the world where we live in. So I was fascinated by that. And that's why I started studying physics. I had a passion for running, of course, but it was something totally different and totally not related to physics, to what I was studying. But I think the two passions got along pretty nicely, and one probably helped the other. during my university years. And I don't know, like the specific subject where I focused was the structure of matter. For example, during my master thesis, I developed like a solar cell with an electrode that was like built in a particular way for photovoltaics. And then like my trajectory completely changed because after university, I was actually a high school teacher for a couple of years before I decided to basically fully focus on running and on the sport of trail running specifically.
I was going to ask you if you were a practicing physicist at this point. It sounds like you've pressed pause on that part of your career until later on in life, maybe.
Yeah, a little bit. But I feel like, this education has really helped me being the person I am, the way I look at the world and reality and everything that is or is not related to physics, because like it's a frame of mind. I like to see it this way. It's not just about, mathematics and numbers, but it's also a way of thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting. And it's been kind of like a running theme on the show over the course of the last few years, interacting with people who are scientifically oriented, who come from kind of an academic career and who find a passion and inspiration out in nature on the trails. And there's this sort of a connection there that I can't relate to personally as somebody who's not an intellectual and wasn't a particularly academic person, but it's something I really admire about people like you. One of the things that I really want to talk to you about, Francesco, is about the ascent of sub-ultra distance racing and the greater ecosystem of trail running. In the US, sub-ultra distance racing is experiencing a bit of a renaissance, but in Europe, it's sort of always been popular. And you're one of the best in the world at the sub-ultra discipline. So as somebody who is steeped in that lineage and informed about the history, can you just tell us a little bit about the significance and the history of sub-ultra distance racing in Europe, mountain running, sky running, et cetera? And before we sort of start talking about the current landscape?
Of course, yeah. This is one of the biggest difference that I see in the way that trail running is seen and perceived in America and in Europe, of course. Here, we have a big tradition in what we call mountain running, which is like short distance mountain races that are usually up to the marathon distance. A lot of them historically are like only uphill races. And then those were the first races that were born here in the Alps, that were basically run by the pioneers of mountain running and also sky running. And sky running is like this short distance, very technical races, mostly run on ridges and high alpine terrain. And when we think about the history of our sport, we always think about, those first runners who ran Kima and the first edition of Sierre-Zinal, for example, and many, many other short distance mountain races here in the Alps, which I think is a huge heritage of our sport that not many people know about. But especially for people who come to trail and mountain running for the first time, I think it's very important to preserve this culture and this heritage of our sport. It's where it has its roots, and without those races, those they might be small today, but without those races, we might not have UTMB or Lavaredo or other races.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get around to maybe talking a little bit more about how the sub-ultra distance racing can help support the growth of ultra distance racing too, because that's something that I think about quite a lot, and that I think, everybody in sort of this mega long distance trail running category can appreciate about the sub-ultra and shorter distance races. But maybe give us a quick state of play from your perspective about the sub ultra distance racing calendar now? Because it's starting to feel a little bit confusing. And as somebody who makes your living in that field, I'd love to hear you talk about it between the Golden Trail World Series, the World Mountain Running Association, Sky Running. Can you give us your opinion about how that category is operating on a global level right now? Some of the pain points and also some of the positives?
True. Yeah, it is a bit confusing with many circuits that are overlapping and calendars that are not always well established. So basically, the state of the sport, as far as sub-ultra distances, is with the World Mountain Running Association that is organizing the World Mountain Running Cup, which is focused on short distance, non-technical mountain races. Then there is like the Golden Trail Series, which is a private organization that is now independent from Salomon. It used to be part of Salomon, but now it's not anymore. It's a series of 6 races. They're a little bit longer than the World Mountain Running Cup, usually between, let's say, 20 and 42 kilometers. So it's a series of 6 races plus a final that is different every year. And those are like the most well-known and established races in the world, basically, in Europe and in the United States, because we have Zegama, Marathon du Mont Blanc in Chamonix, Sierre-Zinal, then a few others like Dolomites Run this year in Italy. Of course, Pikes Peak Marathon or the Ascent in Colorado. And then in 2023, there will be Mammoth Trail Fest in California. So there is like 4 big established races and maybe a couple of new additions every year, plus the final. And then there is skyrunning, which was losing a little bit of traction over the past couple of years. Now it seems like they want to invest more and pick up the circuit again. They've made pretty good investments, so hopefully that will attract some good runners. But I feel like it's a slightly different segment of the sport because it's dedicated to the the athletes that are more experienced on technical terrains, because those races are usually very rugged, very hard, with a high elevation to distance ratio and very technical terrain, very exposed. And I feel it should be this way because then there would be no reason for skyrunning races to exist, because it would be the same as trail running or the Golden Trail Series. So I think there is room for everyone as long as the calendars are like well established, and in order to not to dilute the level of those competitions, and then as long as they develop the sport in a healthy way, I think it's great to have those circuits and series.
How has the density of competition evolved in sub-ultra distance racing over the last 5 years? Because it feels to me that the most competitive races in the world now are happening between 20 and 45K. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely do. I feel like, Zegama, Sierre-Zinal in particular, Marathon du Mont Blanc are the most competitive races. There are like some. The
Pikes Peak Ascent this year was ridiculous.
Yeah, it was really good. Maybe something that on the American side people are not used to, and we're a little more used to here in Europe, is to have that type of density at every race that we go to. And that's one really good thing about, being a trail runner here in Europe. Like every race that I go, there is, Remy Bonnet or Davide Magnini or some, big names, and it's normal. It's never easy to go there and just be sure of your result, because you have to fight for every second, every position, which is good. It makes you grow, and nothing is taken for granted.
That's one of the things that I've been trying to emphasize on the podcast. I recently had Bailey Kowalczyk on the show, who finished 6th at Sierre-Zinal, and I made a point to say that 6th at Sierre-Zinal this year is as good as winning
ridiculous.
Basically 99% of races globally. So
yeah, and that's why for example, the work that you're doing in promoting this type of culture among people that maybe are not involved directly in those competitions is very important, because they grow, like you're growing the sport from
well, I mean, I like
side.
I like to talk about it because I think it's a fantastic product as a spectator and as a fan. And maybe circling back to the Golden Trail World Series, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about this, because I feel like in the US, as we've mentioned now a couple of times, ultra running has always gotten more media attention and therefore probably more sort of enthusiasm from participants across the board. And I think the Golden Trail World Series has really changed that to a large degree, especially this year, coming to the US and having two races, one at Pikes Peak and the other in Flagstaff on back-to-back weekends, bringing a lot of the best European athletes to American soil to race these sub-ultra distance races went a long way. I'd love to hear you talk about how the Golden Trail World Series has specifically moved sub-ultra into this next generation, but also expand on its separation from Salomon, because I don't think that's something that the general audience or the passive observer really recognizes yet.
Yes. So I think the game changer for the Golden Trail Series has been communication. They made huge investments in communication, especially on social media and race coverage, and they did a really good job in that. We must admit. That has been crucial for the growth of this segment of the sport. And compared, for example, to the World Mountain Running Cup, that gets way less funding, for example, and has remained relatively small, still with some really good competition, but way smaller in terms of communication and investments. That has been the biggest difference, I think. And the idea behind that is that with more communication, with more media opportunities, so comes the professionalization of the sport, of the figure of the athletes, but also of the people, race organizers, media coverage and everything that is related to setting up a race series like that, which, I think is normal. It's like growing a business in the sport. So it makes sense. And, the fact that the Golden Trail Series is now separating from Salomon, I think is good. It's good that it's becoming like it's still going to be sponsored by Salomon, but for example, the team manager Greg Bolle, the race series manager Greg Bolle, will not be involved with Salomon anymore, and that is probably a good thing for the sport, because the series will become independent. And that will probably attract other investors and brands, which they probably fear that being a Salomon thing, they wouldn't get the exposure that they could if that series was still part of Salomon, for example. And, the way people saw the Golden Trail Series, especially the first couple of years, it started in 2018. Was that it was mainly dedicated to Salomon athletes, which is now not true anymore. Because if you just look at the results from last year and the race winners, we have Ninka Brinkman from Nike, Ali McLaughlin from On Running, of course Remy Bonnet. We have Sophia Lockley from Salomon again, Killian from Normal. So. A lot of different athletes from different brands participating, which increases the level of the competition and the variety. So there is no reason to think.
I think that came through this year, and that it didn't feel as much like a Salomon exclusive show. Yeah. And Greg Volley, say what you want about him, he's been a fantastic operator on both the athlete front, running the Salomon International team for all these years, but also on the media side, developing so much of Salomon's content creation over the last 15 years that has really inspired a generation of athletes, myself included. And now exiting Salomon and focusing 100% on the Golden Trail World Series. I'm very excited to see the future of that race series.
Yeah, you can criticize Golden Trail Series for many things probably, but it's also true that they brought far more things that are so good for our sport. So I feel like the Golden Tour Series has been a huge project and very successful. So I'm grateful that we have it in our sport.
Yeah. Before we move off this topic, and I really appreciate your perspectives, I'd love to maybe dig into skyrunning a little bit more. You mentioned that it felt like they had maybe lost a little bit of the impact and influence that they had over the past 40 years, really. And it seems that now they're making a new reinvestment in their operation. I saw on their website that it says they're under new management and that they're going to have 100,000 euros in prize money this year. Is there anything else you want to say to expand on skyrunning as it moves into this next generation?
Yeah, I've never been that involved into skyrunning because I'm not that good on technical terrain. But the first time I came in contact with a mountain race, it was a sky race, and Killian was leading, and I met him when I was like 13 or 14 years old, and I didn't know who he was. And then later I found out it was Killian winning Dolomites sky race in the Dolomites. So it was a pretty cool experience. And, people like Fabio Meraldi or Marco De Gasperi from Italy, those historic big names that have made legends of the sport. They all come from skyrunning. So it's important that those races are, have their circuits, their champions, their athletes, and it feels like they've made a pretty decent investment in the sport. So it will be another segment that is worth following.
Yeah. It contributes to the confusion that the consumer feels, not really understanding all these different race series. Even myself, who fancies myself an expert, gets a little confused sometimes. But skyrunning,
we're not doing a very good job at making our sport very understandable.
Which is part of what the Pro Trail Runner Association is working on, which we'll get around to talking to shortly. But yeah, I just feel that skyrunning, it has the brand, it has the history, and so if they can kind of get the operations thing figured out and start building a little bit of momentum again, they'll be in competition with the Golden Trail World Series, but there's no reason why they can't both coexist and be successful simultaneously.
Yeah, it's important to say that they're also under a different federation. Trail running is technically under the World Athletics umbrella, and skyrunning is separate. They took a different direction. So
they have their own federation, the International Skyrunning Federation. Even more confusing. Anyway, let's talk about your career, Francesco.
All right.
Where are you viewing yourself currently at the moment? You're sort of the classic hashtag any surface, any distance type guy who can compete across the board. Where are you feeling your strongest competitively, and where are you finding your biggest motivation at the moment?
Yeah, I probably find my biggest motivation in trying different things, trying new things, exploring our sport across any distance and any terrain. I've started from very short races because coming from a track and field background, it made sense that I tried, short distance, mostly uphill races at first. That's how I got involved in the sport. And now I'm progressing towards longer distances. And the idea is that I will, try I've run a 50K before, but I've never really raced an ultra distance. So that is for sure part of my plans for these or the next years. But the distance that I see myself most competitive at is around the marathon distance. And it's where I've historically had my best results, including, for example, the second place at the World Trail Running Championship this year. With two other
second time finishing on the podium at the World Championship. It's pretty darn.
Yeah, in 2019 it was behind Jim Walmsley in Patagonia, and then this year it was behind Stian Angermund. So two great champions got in my way.
Well, I want to talk about the World Championships here in just a minute. But I'd love to also hear you talk about this variety that you apply to your running and what benefit you've seen from it. Like you're a 2:16 marathoner. Before we hit record, you said you were about to start your sort of cross country season there in Europe. And I've spoken to a few people about this, about variety and that being something that helps keep you fresh and motivated throughout the season. Can you say a few words about that?
Yeah, sure. My main goals are for sure on the trails, but I also like to compete across a variety of distances and terrains, including cross country and road running. In 2021, I focused on marathon training for one season, and I ran 2:16, which is a decent time for a trail runner. I think
a very good time for anybody.
Yeah. That helps, it helps me, yeah, for sure, staying motivated, but it's also really useful for the preparation that I do for trail running. I'm not someone that needs to run 1,000 meters of elevation every day in order to be competitive in the mountains. A lot of my workouts are based on the roads. My training is pretty much based on a classic marathon, preparation. And, that shows that everybody can be a trail runner even if you don't live in the Alps or in Colorado, in the Rocky Mountains, whatever, because with a few adjustments and like knowing where you're going, what you're doing, you can train pretty much for any distance.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm remembering back to, I think it was like in 2015 or 2016, I raced a cross country season in the fall here in the San Francisco Bay Area, leading up to the North Face 50-mile championship. And it was the fittest I've ever been. And the best I've ever felt in a race was coming off of 4 or 5 cross country races throughout that fall. And it's just amazing how that sport in particular, that discipline of running in particular, really translates to trail and mountain performance. So I'm looking forward to now moving back to the San Francisco Bay Area, starting to get my butt kicked by the fast local cross country runners again. So
exactly. I think it's very important to get your butt kicked. Sometimes it keeps you humble. This weekend I'm going to the Campeonato cross country, which is part of the World Cross Country Tour. Yeah. Kipchoge has ran Campeonato cross before. So there will be a bunch of really fast guy, and I will probably fight for the 20th position. But it's good, it's all great work for the upcoming season, and I'm just looking forward to it.
So let's talk about your 2022 season. It seems like it was a year of highs and lows. You just mentioned that you finished second at the World Championship in November, but before that, it seemed like you were dealing with some health issues. I think you broke your elbow twice, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe before we get to the triumph of Thailand, let's first talk about the injury. What was it that you suffered, and sort of maybe what did you learn through that process?
Yeah, before people lose count of the fractures that I had last year. It started with breaking my elbow last year after a race. I was like walking down the trail and I fell and I broke my wrist. And then I managed to win the Golden Trail Series final last year, which was another highlight of my career. But then after that, I had to stop because I had like an injury going on. I had to take care of a problem related to my hip. And I was cross training with the bike and I fell and I broke my left elbow. So basically that's when the nightmare started. The recovery was really painful and took a very, very long time. And when I was back running around March or April last year, I wanted to get fit for the trail season, but a couple of months later, I fell on the trail and I broke the same elbow again. So I had to go through another surgery and another recovery process, which luckily was much quicker than the first one, but still took a lot of energy and a lot of time. I felt like I had a good momentum, which this new accident pretty much stopped. So it was hard mentally. It was probably one of the hardest moments in my career. But now, looking back, I'm grateful of what I've learned from that experience. I've learned to reach out to other people, to ask for help, to work on my mental health, which is just as important as my physical health.
Yeah.
And I feel lucky that I had the support of some great people that I have in my life. So, I managed to recover. I came to the United States and I was very, very inspired by the races that I did. I competed in Pikes Peak Ascent and then Flagstaff Sky Peaks, but even more inspired I was by the nature, by the landscape, by the space that you guys have and we don't have here in Europe because everything is so much smaller. But that gave me a lot of energy. I met some amazing people. So when I went back home, I could really focus on training and then, show up with some really good fitness at the World Trail Running Championship in Thailand and come in second place.
Well, we were happy to have the Golden Trail World Series contingent come to American soil this year, and hopefully you'll be back with that group for Pikes Peak Ascent and the Mammoth Trail Fest in 2023, but we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
The World Championship, what an awesome freaking run, man. Especially the second time that you're finishing second there. I'm sure you're sort of like, man, I need to get a gold medal here again. But 40K race at the World Championship in Thailand, you were behind Stian Angermoon, you just mentioned, and then in front of Jonathan Albin, and just behind him was Max King. So it was a savage podium that you found yourself in the mix of. Tell us about that experience. Tell us about how the race unfolded and what your feelings are in its aftermath.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure of my fitness. I had done some good training and some decent racing. I was fifth in Pikes Peak, for example, which was okay. But it wasn't like I had my best preparation leading up to this championship. But I was confident because probably because I had beaten my opponents at least once before. And then I don't know, like championship races always represent something special for me. I compete for my country. It's not that I don't put the same effort in other races that I do just for myself or for my sponsor, but it's just a different feeling that is hard to describe if you're not there. Mm-hmm. So, I had nothing to lose. I was trying to imagine the days before the race, how I wanted to run, first part, just try to stay in control and hopefully be in front of the race. And then when I found myself in that actual situation, everything became easier. And we started the first climb with Stian, John, and Max all together. Then the first downhill was really fast. Max was pushing the pace. And then at halfway, it was basically the key point of the race, the bottom of the second climb. Stian made a move and I wasn't able to follow. But after that, I was able to drop both Max and John on the second big climb. And then I was able to secure the second place on the second really long downhill to the finish. I had John behind me, which wasn't the best feeling because he's such a good downhiller. But
very fast downhill.
Yeah. He's very good in technical terrain. That downhill was still pretty fast, and there were a couple of smaller climbs which probably saved my life. But yeah, it was great to come home.
Congratulations,
with
man.
Silver medal.
Well-earned silver medal, and probably a really good feeling after the trifecta of fractures that you had been through in the 12 months preceding the race. But I'd love to hear you talk, sort of circling back to your commentary as an informed participant on this stuff. how you felt the Trail and Mountain Running World Championship was in Thailand, because as a spectator, again, it felt like a big step forward in combining the Trail World Champs with the Mountain Running World Champs, with the media that they put together and live streaming. It was a really great, well-packaged experience for us who were consuming it digitally and from afar. What was your experience like there? And, as we move towards talking about the Trail Runner Association, sort of like, what do you think they could do to ensure that it remains relevant in the greater context of the competitive landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, I was pretty skeptic before those championships, because I feel that federations and institutional championship, at least I'm talking about trail running, there's always been world championships specifically for mountain running short distance races, which have always been very meaningful for that segment of the sport. But for trail running, I think the federations have always failed to intercept the true value, spirit, and best athletes of the sport that have historically always been more attracted by other big races and circuits. It's not a secret, UTMB, Western States, and many other big races. But the participation this year was actually pretty good. Like, if you look at data, for example, if you take the average PTRA points of the top 10 of those championships, is comparable to UTMB or CCC or Western States, for example, which shows that the competition was really good. I think there is a long way to go in the way they communicate those championships, because communication was basically not taken care of. There was IRAM4 on site, and other, media companies and journalists and just people talking about it. But from their side, from an institutional side, there was basically nothing. And I think it's not acceptable in 2022 to have a championship like that. But the situation is definitely improving. The fact that we have a combined event with trail and mountain running is great. There is not much overlap in between one event and the other, but it's cool that many different athletes with different backgrounds meet all together for one event. So I think those championships can find a space that is important on both sides of the sport, but they have to work with all the other organizations and circuits involved in the sport, not just also the private ones. And that's one reason why we have established the Pro Trail Runner Association, for example.
Great segue. Let's talk about that now. But just to finish my point, I hope they build on that momentum for next year. It's unfortunate that the World Championships is going to be in June next year, because I think that will dilute the competitive field, just because we'll be getting into, at least in North America, sort of like the Western States season and the golden ticket races, et cetera. And people will be preserving themselves for UTMB. And I feel like the World Trail and Mountain Running World Championship fits really well at the end of the season, although it would have to be held or hosted in a place like Thailand that is free from snow and bad weather for most of the year. So anyway, I hope they are able to deliver a similar high quality product for us fans next June, and Austria is where it's going to be held. So let's spend the rest of our time talking about the Pro Trail Runners Association. This was sort of the main reason why I wanted to have you on the show now. Of course, it's fun to talk about all this other stuff, and I really appreciate all your insights. But the Pro Trail Runner Association is something that you were instrumental in founding. So maybe as we move into this subject matter, just first give a broad explanation of what the Pro Trail Runner Association is and what the mission is.
Yes. So the Pro Trail Runner Association is a nonprofit organization that was founded by a group of professional athletes or elite athletes about 150 of them. And the goal is to make sure that trail running and mountain running have a bright future, and that the values that make our sport so special are preserved. And also to work on some issues that our sport currently has, especially from our side, that is the pro side of the sport, that I think is important to preserve and to understand, because it's the one that pushes the sport forward, basically. I've always been a huge supporter of Freetrail, because one of its missions is to push the boundaries and preserve the spirit of trail running, but also showcase the talent of the professional athletes. So I really find myself in that type of mission. And it's something that we also want to do with the Pro Trail Running Association. We basically want to focus on, 4 main areas. One is anti-doping. There is still a lot that can be done in order to ensure a cleaner and more fair competition. We also want to work on competitions, calendars, and championship to make sure that, for example, there is, with so many circuits and events, the level is not too much diluted, and the federation and circuits are at least talking to each other, sitting down at the table when they're deciding their calendars, which is something that seems so basic, but it's never been done probably. Yeah. Also work on athletes' rights when it comes to, for example, equity, but also diversity, accessibility to races, contracts, maternity leaves, sponsorship values. We would love to have, for example, a minimum contractual value depending on the athlete's performance level. So it's something that we'll work on. And then environment and our social responsibility as athletes. It's important to always have that clear as a key value of the way of why we are athletes and the way we compete. So, addressing our carbon footprint and make sure that circuits and race organizers also respect some standards. It's something that we feel it's important.
It's a big job, and there's a lot to do, and that has become evident with all the materials that you guys have aggregated. It makes me want to have you say a few words about the origin story too, because you mentioned the 130 or 150 athletes who are signed on as members now, but for the most part, it started with 3 people, yourself included. So tell us about that and what made you guys feel that now was the time to bring this into existence.
Yes. We must say it started during the pandemic with Kylian Jornet, who sent an email to a group of athletes, probably about 100 of them. We tried to set up the first pro trail running organization, but then things got difficult because it was too much confusing. And then basically the progress stopped. And then Kylian reached out to me once again this summer. It was after Cerzinal when Marc Angago, the former winner, was disqualified for doping. Yeah. And he mentioned, "Hey, Francesco, we should do something because, with this terrible news, we should do something for our sport and try to push one more time for an athlete organization, to make sure that this situation don't happen again, for example." Mm-hmm. So I was, of course, very positive. And we also asked to Pascal Egli, who is a Swiss trail and skimo athlete, to help us in setting up the organization that is set up in Switzerland, actually. And we started to put together some documents and some work before we reached out to all the athletes across the world. And we got a great response from them because everyone pretty much joined. You can see the list of athletes on the website, and it's pretty much all the big names in the sport, which is something that we're really proud of. And we had our first general assembly in December, and people were really supportive and excited about this project.
There was more than 100 people on the call that day, weren't there? Yeah. I couldn't make it. I was on an airplane, but I watched the recording of it after the fact. And it was, the response from the community of professional athletes has been immense. Can you say a few more words about Kilian? Because I think this is somewhat remarkable, that the greatest of all
really
time
remarkable.
Has made this his mission, and part of his legacy is to set up the next generation to not only make a good living, but to keep the spirit and values of the sport intact. You want to expand on that?
Yeah. I think this is huge. It's very important to understand that Kilian is someone that has had pretty much anything he wanted from the sport. He's won pretty much any race. What else can he ask from a sport that is giving him almost everything, or everything, literally? But, he's still there, striving at the top of the game, as we've seen in 2022, and working to ensure a better future for our sport, which is something that I really care about. So I don't have enough words to describe how much respect I have for him as an athlete, but also as a person. And I think it's so important that he made this association.
Yeah, I mean, just his credibility and his stature as an athlete gives the organization, the association, just tons of credibility.
Yes.
And I'm really excited. We'll get around to talking about the rest of the crew, yourself included, who are on the board. But before we get there, I'd love to, you mentioned the 4 main topics that the association is focused on: anti-doping, athlete rights, the sort of confusing competitive environment we've talked about, and also environmental concerns.
And athletes' rights, yeah.
Yeah, maybe shine a little light on how you determine what you want to work on. Because as I understand it, as a member myself and reading through the materials, there's sort of a way that members, that being professional athletes, can propose projects that the greater whole of the organization focus on in a current year. Can you explain that process?
Yes. So basically, if you're a member of the association, if you meet the criteria to enter the association, you can pretty much get involved as much as you want. You can volunteer to be part of some projects, and you can submit your ideas, or also if you have problems, to the general board, which is made up by 7 people, including myself. And that will be pretty much the core of the association, taking care of all the different topics, issues, and areas that we want to focus on. And then we will have a general secretary. It will be paid by the association to take care of the everyday tasks, because after all, like, we are athletes, we cannot expect to have the time and the energy to devote to this project every single day, 100%. So I think it's important to have at least someone on the first year to take care of this occupation. And, we hope that will expand in the future, and to be able to hire more people to work for the association. But I feel like for now it's a good starting point. People seem to be very motivated, and we will be forming working groups to discuss about the project and carry on with the work.
Thank you. So now say a few words about, you just mentioned sort of the structure. Now there's 7 board members. Do you want to just give them a quick shout out along with the general secretary? I don't know if this is public knowledge yet, so if it's not, we don't need to go there, but I'd love to at least give that recognition to the people who are in the leadership positions.
Yeah, I can give you the name of the members of the general board. So it will be me, Pascal Egli, and then Pau Capel, Esther Zilak, which is from a trail runner from Hungary living in Hong Kong. We have Kathleen Jerbin from the United States, Fred Tranchant from France, and Corinne Malcolm, of course.
Malcolm, yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty great group of board members there. And can you say a few words about the general secretary, who you mentioned is going to be an actual professional position, a paid position? Because after this, I want to talk about the funding strategy behind it.
Yes. Yeah. The general secretary will be a paid position, and he will not be a pro athlete. So someone that has a good understanding and knowledge of the sport, but that can work for us, for our interests, and carry on with our projects, basically. And we feel it's important to have a separate figure to work for the association, because that doesn't need to be an athlete, of course. It's someone that will need to go to the federations, the circuits, UTMB, whatever, to discuss our projects and to make sure that the parties talk to each other, for example. Yeah.
It's the equivalent of DeMaurice Smith for our NFL, our professional football audience, who's the executive director of the Players Association in the NFL. So it's a very important job. Are we allowed to identify who this individual is, or is that still
probably not yet? Yeah,
not yet. Okay, cool. I won't divulge any confidential information. So talking about the funding, this is something that I'm sure people will have questions about. That's important to just touch on here as we sort of bring more of this information into the public domain. I know there's a philosophy to ensure the integrity of the mission, and obviously the financial considerations can in some cases corrupt that integrity. And so there's been a lot of consideration put into the funding of the Pro Trail Runners Association. Can you explain that?
Yes, we basically want to stay independent from any sponsor or private organization, and we will remain a nonprofit organization. The funding will be based on donations and events that we will create with pro athletes, because, after all, we have a great value in being a group of the top athletes in the world. There is a lot of things that we can do. And I feel also that there is a community that wants to support what we want to do, because it's important to understand that we're not working against anyone, against any circuit organization or federation. We want to work together with them to ensure the best in our sport. And also the consequences of our work, the impacts of our projects and choices will be not just for the members of the association, but for everyone. So we will be devoting our energy and time into this project, but the benefits will be for all the people, which is something that is important to understand. And it's actually not my job to set up the financial aspects of the association. It will be the general secretary who will take care of this. So this is what I can say for now.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that. I think it is important to mention that this association is not meant to be in conflict with any race organization or any brand, et cetera. It's to advocate for the interests of the professional athletes, but more importantly, to advocate for the interests of the sport in general, to make sure that we preserve the values that we all love about trail running. Any action items or ways that people can get involved who are listening to the podcast now, aside from directing them to the website?
Yes, we will be setting up a donation page very soon where people can support us. And then I think just, talking about it and reach out if you have any questions or anything is important. And that's all I can think for the moment.
Who wrote the history of trail running article that's on the website now?
I think it's Killian. It's a I think it's a huge work, and
it's amazing.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll link to the website and to this article in the show notes so people can give it a read. It makes it even
everyone
better.
should give it a read because it's the culture of our sport, the history of our sport, and
it's comprehensive.
Yes,
it's
really, very comprehensive.
Well, awesome, Francesco, man. It's been so fun to have you on the show and get to know you. And you're so well considered on all these different topics, in addition to being a great athlete yourself. Before I let you go, you teased earlier that maybe over the course of the next couple of years, you might be getting into some longer distance stuff, even though we spent the bulk of our conversation talking about why sub-ultra distance racing is fantastic. So maybe tell us about what you're planning for and training for 2023 and what your goals are in the future.
Yeah, as I've mentioned, my goal is to explore our sport as a whole, from the shorter to the longer distances. The more I grow, the more I feel attracted by the longer distances. So it's for sure part of my programs to step into the ultra distances. And I haven't made specific plans yet. For this year, the only thing that I know is that I would like to go back to Zagama, where I feel like I have unfinished businesses from last year. Then possibly I will run a UTMB qualifier to either qualify for OCC or CCC. I will not be competing in the short trail distance at the World Championship because I feel like repeating another race so close to the one that I did in Thailand is not that much of an interest for me. So I will probably be focusing on the short uphill race, short distance, like Ali McLaughlin did, for example.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so that leaves the summer pretty open to other options. I'm planning the calendar with my coach and my sponsors. So yeah, I'm really excited, and I feel like there will be some changes this year. I will still be competing in some classic races, Zagama, Sierzinal, and most likely also in the two US stages of the Golden Trail Series. But then there is also room for new things.
Good. No broken bones in 2023. That's the goal number one.
That's the goal.
Well, Francesco, man, it's been great to have you on the show. Thanks for enlightening us about sub-ultra distance racing and especially about the Pro Trail Runners Association. I'll put links in the show notes so people can learn more and get involved. Hope you have a happy new year.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.